Okay, so today I'm going to upgrade my HP DL380p server. Right now it has a base model Xeon processor in it, version 1. Um, and I want to put it in, and it has, I think, 4 cores per processor and no hyper-threading. It's very limited. If we look here, processors, this is on the HP integrated lights out page. So the second Ethernet port on the server gets you to this web page, and you can see, yeah, I have this introductory base model processor. It's got 4 cores, runs at 2.4 gigahertz, and I want to upgrade that to a what I chose is an E5. Let's see, what did I get? Let's look at the quick specs. So on the quick specs for the server, they talk about all the different processors that you could put in it. I think, let's see, I'll take a look at the processors here. I think I put in the 2680. Yeah. So I chose this guy right here. So my 4-core entry-level processor is now going to be a 2.8 gigahertz with 10 cores. Takes a lot more power to 115 watts, whereas the entry-level one is up here, and it was only 80 watts. So I expected to generate a little more heat, but should be a lot faster. So they have the version 2 processor. In order to use the version 2 Xeon processor, we need to update the firmware of the server. HP has this document that they put out which describes exactly how to do it. Tells you what scope, what servers are within the scope of the document. This one right here is mine. It's the DL380p Gen 8. Talks you through the whole entire thing. Of course, at first it tells you to use HP support, but you know, I'm a home user. Obviously, an enterprise user would probably do that years ago, but this is an old server at this point. So we just go through and do it ourselves. Basically, the process goes as this: is you need to upgrade the firmware first. Then you'll shut down the server, remove the old processors, put in the new ones, and boot it up, and it should be working. Obviously, when you're upgrading firmwares, you could brick stuff, so please be very careful and consider what you're doing before you do it. But this document is really quite comprehensive in describing exactly what you need to do and when you do it. So the first thing it says that you need to do is to upgrade the firmware. You could do this with 3 different options. There is a downloadable ISO CD-ROM file system right here that you can download. This HP IVB update .iso. You can burn that onto a disk and boot off of that in your server. You can use the remote console here on the ILO and do it this way. I don't trust this because I just don't want to be doing a firmware update through a network connection. I'd rather have physical media in the drive. Okay, so I just tried this off a USB key, booting off of Rufus, and it wasn't, or using Rufus to make a USB key, and that wasn't working quite right. So I'm going to just go ahead and burn a DVD with this guy. So I'm going to burn the disk image and do it this way and boot off of that on the server. It's a small ISO. It's only 130 megs, so this should only take a second, and then we can go down and boot off of that. Again, you can use the integrated console, and you can say, hey, I want a virtual drive, and you can connect to a virtual drive. I don't love that. So I'm going to try this off the DVD drive. So I'll be back after I have this in the server and I'm booting off the DVD. One other thing to note, I'm curious to see what this thing is going to do. when it upgrades the server. So on the HP ILO, the lights out configuration, under system information, I went over here to firmware. It shows you the firmware on all the different pieces. I'm just going to take a screenshot of this so that I can compare this after the upgrade is done, just because I'm curious to see what happens. Okay, so I've gone with the route of booting this firmware update off of a DVD drive. I was trying to do it off a USB key and that wasn't working quite right, so I've switched over doing this off of DVD. I think it's because of the USB key I have. It gives me problems. So we're going to wait for this guy to boot, and I've been having trouble where it doesn't want to see my keyboard. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but hopefully this time it'll work. I was going through this little USB hub. I've taken that out of the equation, and we'll see if this thing wants to work this time. So we're booting up. Everybody looks happy. I actually just upgraded this server, well, not upgraded it, but changed it. I put a large form factor drive cage in the front of it and took the SFF off, the small form factor. The 2.5-inch drives are much more expensive and seem to be less reliable. Now with 3.5-inch drives, I can put in regular consumer SATA drives, stuff like that. So there's another video for that on YouTube. We're waiting for this guy to boot up. Hopefully in a second it's going to have a little option at the bottom to press F11 to get to the boot menu. And we'll see what happens. Okay, it's beeping just because I have a security switch disabled. Okay, the keyboard worked now. You can see that F11 is now highlighted, so it's going to go to the boot menu after it's done booting up all the different ROMs. Escape. Okay, so here's our options. I want to do a one-time boot to the CD-ROM. I just heard the CD-ROM spin up a little bit. Okay, there we go. So there's the CD-ROM. Well, the light's already off, so all right, so it says this process will update your system to support Xeon version 2 processors. It'll take several minutes. Do not interrupt once it's started. And then as I was reading to you, it went ahead and started because it says it will update in 10 seconds. Alternatively, you can just press enter and it'll do its thing. So now we can see the CD-ROM drive is reading. This is actually a DVD, and it is upgrading the, right now it looks like it's loading a version of Linux, some stripped down version of Linux to do the firmware update. So it's going to be doing this for a little while. I'll see what happens. Okay, now it says ready, whatever that means. So it said this was going to take several minutes. I don't know exactly what that means or how exactly many minutes that will be. Looks like it's doing something. It says done up in the upper right-hand corner now. Okay, loading drivers, configuring devices. Loading additional drivers, recognizes the server, what it is, seems to be just rolling through everything. Okay, upgrading system ROM, upgrading boot blocks. And you can see it's doing this through Linux because it's calling Born Again Shell Interpreter. Upgrading ME firmware. So it seems to be doing its thing. We'll just keep an eye on it, make sure there's no errors, and go from there. I'm going to try and, I'm kind of tired of holding this phone, so I'm going to move this monitor back, if I can. stand, if I can. Update process result. Success. Okay, I don't have to put the phone on a stand. All right, now it says press enter to reboot. So I suppose we can do that. So now we still have the old processors in here. We've upgraded the firmware. It just ejected the DVD drive, preparing to reboot. And then we should see the server screen go back to the post screen here in a moment. Your server will reboot in 60 seconds, or press any key to reboot now. All right, rebooting now. Alrighty. So now I'm just going to let this thing boot up and see if it goes into my ESX hypervisor. Seems to be taking a little bit longer now. Alright, there it fires up. Fans go kind of crazy, which they always do when this thing boots. Alright, System BIOS still has the same date on it, so I don't know exactly what it updated. We'll look at the ILO port, look at that firmware to see what exactly was just updated. The instructions said this could take 10 to 12 minutes, but really it was over in like 2. So, that's nice. At this point, just for safety's sake, because I'm kind of nervous that I'm going to brick something, I want to watch this thing boot all the way up into my ESX hypervisor. With the old processors, so that I know I haven't bricked anything, and then we'll go ahead and tear this guy open and actually change out the processors to the new version 2 Xeon processors that I bought. I got the version 2 processors on eBay. There's lots of people that have used processors. I've never seen a processor go bad in 20 years, so I don't worry about buying those used. They cost me, I think, about 90 bucks a piece. It's January of 2020, so, you know, 6 years ago, those things probably went for $3,000 a piece, so good price. And it's a great way to upgrade these old servers and see what you get. Okay, everything looks good so far. All right. Looking good. Loading VMware ESXi. Okay. So, looks like we have upgraded this. The firmware anyway. So I'm gonna go to let this guy boot up. And then I gotta run upstairs and turn off some of the VMs that are gonna automatically boot. And then I'll come back down and we'll upgrade the processors themselves. Okay, so we've just completed the firmware update, but I haven't changed the processors out yet. I want to make sure everything was still running with the old processors before I take the other ones out. However, I did just come up and look at the lights out configuration up here. Here's the screenshot that I took before. And then this is what's currently showing on the server. So we can see that the server platform services firmware was updated 2.1.7 E7.4, whereas down here it was 2.15. And then let's see, nothing else has changed except for the system ROM boot block is now dated March 5th, 2013, whereas before it was August 30th, 2011. A lot of these firmwares probably need to be updated. I haven't, I just got this server and I haven't really learned how to do that yet, so they are what they are for right now. But it does appear that the DVD that I booted off of did, in fact, change the firmware, and the server should be ready to take our version 2 Xeon processors. Okay, so the server is now off. I'm going to start moving stuff around a bit here. Unplug my power cables. Okay, so I've got those out. All right, now it's just time to open up the processor and open up the server and take the processors out. Okay. So, in my other video, I described how I turned the small form factor server into a large form factor. Because of the way I did it, I didn't replace this cable. I just have this running over the fan cage. So mine's going to look different than yours, just because of that. Once I do that, everything should look real similar. Okay, so let me put this on a stand of some sort and see if I can get you in a position where you can be watching what I'm doing. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. I'll be able to show you that processor right there. So first things first is take off this shroud. It has 2 clips on it that make it just pop right out. And what we're trying to get to is underneath here. This is the heat sink for the processor. Processor will be below it. Pull this fan cage module out. Okay, so there's one processor, there's the other. So I'm just going to focus on this one, and then the process for the other one will be exactly the same. So basically, working on a server, this stuff is all very sensitive to electrostatic discharge or ESD. Make sure you're touching the case. Mine's sitting in its server rack, so it's also grounded to earth. So this lever lifts up right here, and then that whole thing comes up. Now the heat sink is exposed. Now the heat sink is going to be glued on a little bit by the thermal compound, if I'm understanding this guy right. Okay, so that comes right off. You can see there's a lot of thermal compound on here. We're going to clean that off before we put in the new processors. Note the arrows. The air goes from the front of the machine to the back. So we will keep note of that when we put this back in. So I'm going to put that aside. So the server, or the processor, has 2 levers on it that I need to figure out here. So there's a little push down right there. That lifts up one of them. And then over here, there's another one. That lifts up the other one. And bam. Wow, that's actually really nice. I hadn't seen that before. The server, or the processor just pops right out. Then it's got this little drawer on it. And there you go. So this little blue drawer, I don't know exactly how that's going to release the processor so that we can put in the new one, but we'll see that shortly. So as I recall, this came down in here. Yep. So the tab for you to grab is at the top. And then you can't do any damage. Well, you can, but the amount of damage you can do is minimal. Do not touch these pins in here. These are all like little tiny springs. I've touched them before, and it is a challenge to bend them back into place. It's very, very sensitive. If you screw those up, you're going to miss a pin on the processor, and the whole thing's just not going to run. Or worse, you might short something out on the processor and just blow it up. So be super careful. Don't touch that. That's why it was actually really nice that this drawer just popped open. That's to keep you from making any stupid mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to pause this video and go and start up another one in a different place where I can clean up this heat sink, and I'm going to pull off the other one off video as well. Okay, so here's our 2 server processors. These are the old ones.
One thing to note is the amount of, let me pull this out here, is the amount of paste that's on there. You can see this one actually is a little sloppier than I like. There's a little bit of paste coming out here on the side. You want to be careful how much paste you put on there. All you're trying to do is create, close contact between the server and the heatsink. And a common mistake is that people just put on way too much paste. So we want to avoid that. So as we're cleaning this heatsink up and applying paste for the new processors, we want to be cognizant of how much we're using. Here's the new processors. I don't know if we'll be able to read this on the screen or not. Maybe. It's barely readable. It says E5-2680 version 2 over here on the edge. Maybe if I get it in the shadow. I don't know. But just for a sanity check, I'm gonna turn these two processors over, see that everything lines up properly, so it's actually like that. So my new processor, if you look at some of the indentations out on the edges here, make sure all those match up, like right there, looks similar to there, right? And just make sure that the processors are indeed the same. Okay, so after that, we really don't have to do too much. I'm going to put the processors aside, and then I'm just going to clean up the heat sinks. So I'm just going to grab a putty knife and some paper towels and scrape all this stuff off. After it's been on there for a while, it gets kind of dry, and it comes off really quite easily. Get some of this goop off the side. What you don't want to do is you don't want to do too much, because then it spills out the side, it gets a mess, and it gets all over other things. So you don't want to do that. So right there, it's pretty much scrubbed off just by wiping it with a paper towel and scraping off the excess and then wiping it with a paper towel. For completeness, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit with some alcohol just to make sure that it's completely clean, because I'm just that way. Okay, so that's one of them. Do the other one. Again, we're just going to scrape off the thermal compound. You want to be careful when you're doing this. Don't scratch. Don't put deep gouges into the heatsink. That'll make the thermal compound have to do more work in keeping good contact between the server, or between the processor and the heatsink. So I'm going to get all that excess off of there and wipe this again with a paper towel like I did before. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Just going to do the same thing, wipe it down with some alcohol. I still have some alcohol in this paper towel I was using a moment ago. So, wipe that down, and we are rocking and rolling. So, next up is going to be to figure out, and I've never used these before, is these drawers for holding the processor, this blue guy. I'm not exactly sure how to get the processor out of him, but it looks like it's just held by a couple of tabs. One there, one there, one there, one there. So 4 tabs. So I think this should just pop off, but I'm not sure. There might be some sort of release mechanism, but I'm not seeing anything. I don't see how else it could be grabbing the processor. Hopefully it's not glued on. Doesn't appear to be. Looks like it actually is glued to the processor. So when we put this back in, we can either try to glue it or, yep, see, I had to just break that off. So that's kind of a bummer. I really like that design, but I don't want to have to buy, you know, processors from HP just for that thing. We don't really need that drawer. We can make this work without it, I'm sure. We'll just have to fit it in the server carefully. Okay, so that guy pops off. So the processor had been in there just like this. So we're done with that processor. Let's see what happens if I gotta make sure I get this oriented right. So this stuff, this writing up top was towards the tab. And it looks like you could put this in backwards, so you gotta be careful. So this is the way that it was. I really don't want to touch. You know, I think I might put some double-sided tape on this just to hold the server in place. Very gently, just put some double-sided tape there. Maybe, let's see. You don't need much. I mean, because once it's in the server, it doesn't really need this bracket. This bracket is just for convenience. So I'll have to figure that out. But it's going to get really hot, so I don't want to use double-sided tape that I don't know isn't thermally nice. So I think I'm just going to leave these just like this. I'm not going to do anything because I don't have an appropriate glue, and I don't want to use something that's going to melt inside the server. So I'm going to just leave that just like that. So I'm going to put that one aside, and then I'm going to work on the other one. Which, again, this really kind of sucked. You gotta kind of pop these things off. I'm sure I could just not use these altogether. So, all right. Like I said, I don't particularly love this, but what are you gonna do? All right, so then keeping track of where the different missing pin patterns were. So I know this one was on this side, that more squarish one was on the left side. I'm going to put this processor in place. And then we'll put it downstairs, we'll put it in the server, and then we'll apply the heat sink and apply the thermal compound and put the heat sink back on. So I'll be back. Okay, so back at the server. I'm looking at this, and it looks like this blue portion is really just there for the convenience of being able to pull the processors out. So that slips down into there. It's not going in very easily. I wonder if I have that in wrong. I do. Okay, so that's just going to go like that. If we look at the actual, let me get a flashlight here. If we look at the actual socket, you can see those, you know, like on the one side, you can see that there's missing pins so that you can orient the processor. So we want to make sure that those things line up with our missing. Let me see if I can put this down. Yeah. So want to make sure that make sure everything matches up with what it looks like in the processor socket itself. But the processor socket is actually keyed on the top and bottom, and it's got a wall around it, so you really can't put in the processor wrong. But you just want to be very careful to put it in right so that you're not forcing it in there. So as I look at this, It looks like what I need to do is this. Now this is super careful. Do not bend those springs. It'll just drop in and it'll be locked in place. So now the server or the processor is just sitting in its hole. And you can see there in the corner, like right there, that it is held in on all four corners. So now what we should be able to do is we just take the door down. Now I'm going to leave this blue thing in here because I think that's actually helping to apply pressure to the processor. Okay, so I'm going to hold that down. If we look from the top down, it says close lever first, and then on the other side it says open lever first. So that means we want to close this one on the left first, and that makes this come down. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so that one is now locked in place. And then this guy, he's going to put pressure on the other side. And now he's locked in place. Okay, so now the processor is in place. So I'm just going to wipe him off a little bit. So now we need to put on some thermal compound. You can put it on the processor, you can put it on the heatsink. I like to put it on the processor because then I don't know, because oftentimes heat sinks are bigger than processors, so you can tell where it's going to end up if you put it on the processor, because I don't want it to spill onto other things. So I'm just going to put a little, this container of thermal grease that I have is a little old. Okay, there we go. So I suspect I'm not going to need much more than that. I'm going to use my finger and just create a nice, even, relatively thick layer. Stay away from the edges because it is going to spill out. So I'm getting close to the edges, but not all the way, because you don't want to have too little because you'll overheat and, you know, bad things will happen. But that's about it. So I've got a nice layer of, pretty thin layer on there. It's going to spill out a little bit, you know, but then we'll put the heatsink on, we'll clamp it down, and it will be ready to cool. So without further ado, here's our heatsink. Remember, we got to pay attention to which way the air is going to flow on this guy. I'm looking at this. It doesn't look like it has any keys on it. Looks like it just goes into place. There's a standoff right here, and then there's a hole right there that holds it, and then there's two in the back, and there's two standoffs in the back here. So we're just going to get it onto those. Gently rest it down. There's no reason to like push down hard on this. That's what your bracket's going to do. So we'll just bring the bracket down, lock it in place. Now the heatsink is in place. And we should have good contact there because we put a nice liberal coat of goo on it. If you're worried about it, give it a shot. Open it back up, check to make sure that you put enough grease on it, wipe all the grease off and do it again. I've done this quite a few times, so I feel pretty confident that I have the right amount of grease on there. So now I'm just going to do the same thing with the other one. I don't think there's any reason for me to show you that, so I'll pause that, I'll stop the video for now, and then show you the finished product.
Alright, so we can see it's booting up. We could take a look at the system information right now. We can look at temperatures. These are the ones I'm concerned about right here. They're both running at about 40 C right now. That's a good cool temperature. I can restart it and I can refresh this page, see if that increases. Go back to temperatures. 40°, so it looks like they're being cooled well. Let's see what the server is actually doing. Okay, so it's booting up. All right, there we see it says we have our E5-2680 version 2s running at 2.8 gigahertz. Looks like everything's posting well. So I just want to sit here and wait and see if the ESX starts running. Let's take a look at those temperatures again while it's continuing to do stuff. If I look at power, so still running at 40°, so they're happy. Power supplies, my power supplies are actually kind of low, but are actually kind of small. They're 460 watt. I don't have any auxiliary cards in there. That might become a problem when these processors really kick in. I'll have to see. But here we go. Here's our new processors. 10 cores, 20 threads. Lots more cache than what we had before. And this guy's rocking and rolling. Should be a much better server now. Let's get back. Okay, ESX is running, so it looks like we're successful. We have upgraded the server to version 2 Xeon processors, and that should be it. Thanks for watching.